Good afternoon and good morning to some of the people joining us around Australia and New Zealand today. My name is Sophie Harrington, and we bring to you today the Child and Adolescent Parent Violence and Abuse session 2 of the 3 webinars that we have. Today's session is going to be slightly different than the one we had previously. Just before I start, I would just like to introduce a couple of people that we have with us today. So my name is Sophie Harrington. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for NOFASD Australia. We also have Kurt Lewis with us today.
Howdy, everyone.
Thanks, Kurt. And Kurt's here, and he's going to be recording our session today and helping us out with any technical issues. So we're very grateful to have Kurt here. He's one of our NOFASD Australia team. And our surprise guest, but the most important person, I should say, today that we've got with us, which we actually thought would be coming to us via a video link, is Anita Gibbs, the Associate Professor that we have who's taking today's session from University of Otago. Hi, Anita.
Hello. Hi.
So we're gonna, and we're delighted to have her here in person because we thought it would be a video link today. So yeah, very excited. So before we start, I would just like to acknowledge that NOFASD Australia would like to pay respects to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now today, for those of you that joined us in session 1, you know that we're having some pretty courageous conversations, and Anita will be sharing some really powerful and impactful information with you today and some insights. So keep yourself safe. Please be aware that there is support out there for you. We will give a list of support numbers at the end of today's session. But also we have the NOFASD helpline with the lovely Robin Smith at the end of that phone line. And we operate that line 7 days a week. And the number is there for you on the screen, which is 1-800-860-613. As with last time, we will be asking you to send through some questions through our Q&A tab. I can see I've already got 3 questions this morning, so that's fantastic. We will record those answers anonymously, and even though we do have Anita with us today, we will actually be still keeping hold of those sessions for session 3, which will be on Tuesday the 4th of August, which will also be a live session. I'm now going to hand over to Anita, so hopefully the technology works for us and she can kick me off the screen.
Well, kia ora koutou. I am about to kick Sophie off the screen and get all my slides organised, people. So I just want to say tēnā koutou katoa, ko Dartmoor te moanga, ko ex te awa, ko Exmouth te moana, ko Anglo-Saxon te iwi, ko Devonian te hapu, ko Exeter Cathedral te marae, ko Anita Gibbs toku ingoa, no inga rangi aho, and Gari ke Otapoti taku kaianga, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. And that's my greeting to you in Māori, saying that I'm originally from the UK, but I'm very much living in Otapoti and Dunedin. So thank you also, Sophie, that you welcomed and acknowledged and paid respect to the traditional custodians and elders of Australia. So what we're going to do today is obviously have a continuation, which I'm looking forward to. If you recall, and I hope you were all able to attend the last webinar, we explored what we thought was APV, or adolescent to child to parent violence and abuse. We had pondered what it actually meant and its impact in particular, a range of impacts, as well as obviously a range of what we call it. And today we're going to focus on different responses. So we're going to focus on personal responses, people's experience. We're going to have Lee again contribute a couple of videos. Then we're going to look at you know, different programs that are available, Australia, UK, elsewhere. I'll chuck out questions as we go along that I'm hoping you'll collect and respond to, so that we can have a really good live Q&A session in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm not going to play this clip, but I'm just going to, for those of you who might have just tuned in, if you like, making this the first webinar that you're viewing, later, possibly after the webinar, you might want to go and refresh your thinking about this issue by reviewing this small clip of the BBC. It's a couple of minutes long, but it basically shows what's going on for some families in the UK, but they're going on for our families in New Zealand as well, and Australia. So it's not an uncommon experience, as we highlighted in webinar 1, and it's obviously has significant mental well-being impacts, as well as often physical and financial and other impacts on families. And those of you listening are likely to have been on the receiving end of that. So we're just going to start with Lee. Lee, if you recall, is a social worker based in New Zealand, and she talked about the challenges that she faced living with her adoptive daughter, and the daily and relentless abuse that she was experiencing, but from a perspective of her daughter having a neurodisability and an intellectual disability. So she understood the context and the distress, I guess, of knowing that her child is disabled, but having to live with an awful lot of abuse and conflict, and not feeling she was getting help. So we're going to listen to Lee again in terms of her experiences of professionals helping or perhaps not helping.
How have professionals responded to your situation?
It's been really difficult for us to get any intervention. We lived in a different part of the country and we couldn't access any services at all, even medication for our daughter. And so we did move and uproot the family to a different part of the country, to where we heard they had a good child development team. So my daughter got lots of additional diagnoses, but she's still there's still been no intervention really, because she's got a diagnosis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, reactive attachment disorder, and severe speech and language disorder and intellectual disability, and she's got other diagnoses as well as that. But a lot of mental health is CBT or mindfulness, and those won't work with our daughter. And because there seems to be a lack of knowledge and awareness around fetal alcohol, that there's no interventions. So it's been really hard to get any traction on that. We have had behavioural services involved. The first time they couldn't offer us anything that we weren't already doing, and the second time they did tell us that their interventions might make her behaviour worse, and we asked what strategies they would use and they couldn't tell us, and then we said it would be unethical to use strategies that would make her behaviour worse when we weren't coping with the level of violence already, so we didn't engage with that. We have been told if we want more funding to call the police to get evidence. We have done that, and as a result of that we've had armed defenders round when she's made threats to kill us, and we have had her taken away in handcuffs, age 13. But we found with just calling the police, it just made her anxiety levels through the roof and the violence worse. We didn't get any more funding, and we were just a tick box for agencies to ring the next day, like Women's Refuge and other agencies. Are you all right? No, I'm not. And it was just a tick box exercise really. So we've really struggled to get any intervention, and yeah, and it's just been a real hard journey for us, quite isolating.
Thank you, Lee. Just go back to sharing my screen. So you can see, and from Lee's experience, how challenging when you ask for help the reaction is, to the point of escalating the situation sometimes, when she's crying out for help and support, and yet somehow professionals are perhaps well-meaning, making it worse. And a number of you may have had those experiences, and yet at the same time you're desperate and you're going like, well, who else is there to turn to, because I can't seem to get the help that I need for my family, and it seems as if the justice system is always going to be the last resort. So the kinds of responses that come up time and time again in people's the literature and research studies, is that people feel that professionals might have a little bit of understanding. I mean, I personally, as you know, last time I talked about that, this is an issue that I've struggled with my young men with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and ADHD, that quite often you are trying to explain things to people and they're going, well, look, you've got it sussed. They can't believe it because they know you're being pretty good parents, but it's almost like it's too hard basket. And all teenagers are like that. There's a lot of put downs that parents experience, and then you get to feel, or you're made to feel, that it's your parenting that's at fault, because somehow they're not doing this at school, or they're not doing this in other contexts, so it must be something that needs to be changed at home, and parents can end up feeling dreadful and guilty and humiliated and completely misunderstood. And I know that because I've definitely had that experience in my own life, and then the trauma that you're experiencing is not being acknowledged. I did find the refuge services were the only agency that kind of goes, sort of said, yeah, you are experiencing trauma and distress because you are being, abused. And even if we're not blaming anybody, this is still your reality, and you are suffering from, sort of a post-traumatic kind of stress. So the issue is where can parents turn to if they, can't necessarily call the police, or if they do, where is the help post that? I mean, I got some help from the refuge post police call outs. I had a period of in our family time where I was calling the police. It felt like every other day because of all sorts of incidents going on. And when the help comes, maybe sometimes it's just not sufficient. Often people are offered 6 weeks of a WE program, and you feel like you're just getting started. We've had some functional family therapy, and I felt we were just getting going. And then it was, I'm sorry, but I'm only funded for 6 weeks. Maybe we could, find another bit of money for extra 2 weeks. But after that, we're out of here, and you need to go back to the Child Protection Services for more. Basically, you can't find that help that you need. So what's sort of your experience? I mean, this is something, we can definitely discuss in our Q&A webinar in a couple of weeks' time. With interpersonal violence, there's often a coordinated multi-agency response, but often with adolescent to parent violence or child to parent violence and abuse, there's an absence. Maybe in your area, there is actually something happening, but certainly my experience in New Zealand and parts of the UK is that coordinated? I don't think so. It's one of those things that falls through the gap, which is why we're trying to discuss it. So we need some responses, and there are programs we will look back on. But there's the MARAM resources, of course, that have come out of Victoria through the Royal Commission into Family Violence. The MARAM resources, which are extensive, and I've put the web page up there, because they do actually have a section on adolescent to parent violence, and it's worth having a look at. I mean, the resources themselves, I've got an image here. I'm not obviously going to spend much time on this, but they're comprehensive, and they're designed to get agencies talking to each other, working together. They're designed to get screening, mid-assessment, intermediate risk assessment, and full assessments going on, and different agencies do different things. And ultimately, they're designed to better support families where there's family violence broadly going on, as well as specific types of family violence. So, for example, an adolescent who's harming another sibling or who's harming their mother in some capacity. It's designed to try and unpack some of that. But it might be that we need more detailed provisions in this area that we're talking about, child to parent violence and abuse, than just a generic family violence tool. Helen Bonnick, who I think I might have mentioned last time, she's got a YouTube talk about her book, and her book is, I mean, I hope some practitioners or support workers might be listening to this webinar or view it at some point, because her book is a great guide to professionals working with families in this specific area, and it's born out of her research with families and her many years, decades of work with families and highlighting this form of violence and abuse. And she, basically summarizes, that obviously you need to work in partnership with families, and you can't take sides. So you can't just have a child focus or a mother focus or a father focus or, situation where you're targeting one person focus. You've got to name the issue that's going on, and obviously you've got to find out what's going on in terms of triggers. You've got to unpack it with really good assessments, and you've got to focus on the strengths and protective factors as well. What does reduce some of this violence and abuse that's going on, if anything, and if not, what is the safety plan? I mean, I never thought about doing a safety plan until Refuge sat me down and said, well, what is your safety plan? I'm going like, well, the safety plan is for when partners are beating their wives up, and they were saying, no, you need a safety plan as well for you and your children, and if you need to leave, you need to leave at some point, but also if they need to leave for a while, then that needs to happen too. We need to find a way and a process to identify if that's what is going to make the difference for immediate safety. So the focus is on identifying the broader supports, obviously, who can help implement strategies to support as well as de-escalate. I mean, we'll talk about neurodisability a bit more in a minute, but essentially we are looking at trying to help a completely escalated child or youth de-escalate, and we're trying to bring down the tension in the interactions if the violence is continuing to occur. But the focus is also on rebuilding positive relationships to support the parent to feel empowered, as well as the child to feel safe. And I identified last time, often the children are not feeling safe, and it's not because the parents are making them feel unsafe, it's just that they don't feel safe. So we need to understand what the communication is from the child so that we can actually think about how do we help them feel safe. Now this slide's, we're thinking about strategies and interventions. Meeting a child's aggression with adult aggression only adds fuel to the fire. Yes, well, I'm sure we've all done that a little bit, not intentionally, but we've blown up and lost our rag and, said something, and it's just made it a whole lot worse. Obviously, aggression with aggression is not going to reduce aggression. We obviously need to find ways to bring in calmness and compassion. And being calm is not passive. It's about obviously being in control of yourself. It's about being mature. Be it to teach it. And that's a quote from Rebecca Eanes. So what does that look like, or what it might look like? Now, Dr. Bruce Perry, I believe that, again, a number of you will be aware of his work, his emphasis in terms of calming children, but thinking about the child who's had trauma, who's got a neurodisability, whose brain pathways perhaps aren't working in the same way as neurotypical children, emphasizes that you don't head straight for reasoning. You don't head straight for arguing, through what the issues are as you see them as the parent. No, you're looking to regulate. We're looking to de-escalate first, obviously, but you're trying to calm the situation by introducing regulatory activities. So you're trying to help the child calm, reduce the flight, reduce the fright, reduce the freeze, in a sense. So you're needing to be soothing and assuring. So what activities might work for you as a family that will reduce a child where they're getting really stressed? I know that Claire Gidd in New Zealand often talks about strip it back down to bare bones in terms of expectations. Well, for some people that might be what's required to help a child, because they're finding their expectations too overwhelming and too demanding. For others it might be lots of activity, it might be dancing. For others, it might be mindfulness. One of my sons done a lot of mindfulness in his teens. And I mean, he just zings around the room all the time. I mean, it's exhausting when you're and that's with medication. And you sit in a room with him and it doesn't take long before you're all worn out. But he's been doing some mindfulness with one of his support workers. And it's been really good for him. It's been really good for him. So it might be that slowing down, the meditative breathing. For some people, it might be lots more action, singing and dancing, perhaps. How do you help regulate and sort of, playfulness, whatever it is you need to introduce to the child? Obviously, relating, the core of any family is a positive relationship, and again, sometimes that can be really difficult if you've been abused, because you're going like, I don't want to stay and hang around with this youth who's really being unbelievably rude and throwing cups past my ears. I'm not sure I want to hang around and connect back to, but actually they do need you to be reaching out to them, don't they? They do need you to be going like, I see you're really upset, and I'm upset too, but you're trying to connect with them, being attuned to them and being sensitive to the fact that they are feeling overwhelmed and distressed and anxious and fearful, even though it looks like they're being horrible. I mean, it looks like they're deliberately targeting you sometimes and deliberately trying to make you as a miserable wreck as possible. But actually, a lot of the time, they're actually crying out for connection and relating. So that, again, strategies to do that, playing, having fun together, being present. That's a lot of the emphasis of the programs, is being present. And it sometimes goes against your instinct when you actually want to do the opposite. Actually, you're thinking, I feel like throttling you, actually, whereas really it's like, somehow you've got to say, I can see you're really, really struggling. How can we get you through this great time of distress and painfulness, that clearly things are going on for you that you can't talk about very easily sometimes. So only after kind of regulating and relating, can we start reasoning. And again, I feel like sometimes when I had situations that blew up and maybe we calmed them down and maybe we got a bit of connection going, that, I didn't maybe always take the opportunity to have a conversation of a reasoning kind, because it's almost like everything else took so long, there was no time left over to actually go like, hey, how could we do it differently next time? What can we do to collaborate together to solve what was going on for you? Is there a better way for you to be able to express your feelings in the moment of explosion? Now, we've got to take each child as they are. Some children obviously have greater reasoning capacity, and others have, less reasoning capacity, and that relates to obviously executive functioning. And a number of our children have fairly substantial impairments in executive functioning. However, there are still some things that we can possibly connect and reason with our children. So being curious, asking questions, attempting to enable a child to come up with the solutions as much as you, helping a child see that you were distressed and afraid, and that there might be something small that they can do to fix that or connect back. Might be something quite small and simple. But yeah, Bruce Perry's always got lots to offer us in terms of his ideas. So here's a question, and it's a question that we can explore obviously in a couple of weeks' time, but thinking about what would help you. I mean, what would help you? People just often say there's nothing. Sometimes they go, well, thankfully I've got a friend in a coffee group that I share things with, or I have a relative who went through this and she's offered me some advice. But what kind of support is it you're looking for? What difference would it make to your family in terms of what you've tried, but where you want to see some change? Would it be more respite? I mean, I find a lot of the time now that if I get enough respite, I can kind of cope with more flack. Whereas in the past, I didn't get any breaks. So I couldn't, handle the 7-day-a-week relentless abuse and distress and threateningness of what was happening in our situation. But I can, if I have a few days rest, I can sort of go, yeah, I'm up for a weekend, and I can cope with it more. It's because you've just had time to recover, because as long as you understand a lot of the time your child can't necessarily help doing what they're doing, you can better accommodate what's going on for them. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be beaten black and blue, don't get me wrong. I mean, violence is not okay, but it means that I certainly find I can take a lot more insults than I used to be able to take, which is kind of interesting. And I don't think it's about having a hard skin or being numb to it. I actually just think I've had enough rest and respite so that I can actually, take a deep breath rather than get into battle straight away with either of my sons. But is it a specialist group? Is there some kind of specialist program or support group that would help, where you can nut out things together more, or even a joint family therapy situation where you've got somebody actually facilitating a conversation with you and your children? What about someone coming into the house? I mean, a lot of people find that too much, but there have been times when I found that really quite helpful, where someone has come in to support me for a few hours, or just to be another presence, and distract all of us from our family interactions, in a sense, or to do something fun in the family home, or for people to come in and go like, oh, look at all those holes in the walls. Whew, you must have been going through some really tough times. To be able to get it, to be able to get what you're going through. But other people say, no, I can't bear that. It's too much of an invasion of a place where I hope to hold dear and safe. But of course it's tricky, because often our homes aren't safe, are they? In the sense of that we feel we can relax when we get back, because we don't know what we're going to face if we've been experiencing months and months or years of abuse and threats and all sorts of ways in which we've experienced that violence and psychological pressure and trauma and control. And what about peer-to-peer options? Are there other options that would help in terms of others supporting you who've been through it themselves? So these are things to ponder on, and your additional ideas will be more than welcome in terms of our chat in a couple of weeks. So we're going to have our final clip from Lee before I explore some programs that are available. And she's going to talk for about 4 or 5 minutes about all the different things that she's tried. And again, some have been useful, some have not been useful. So I will just click away.
What strategies have you used to manage or cope with the situation?
When our daughter was younger, we used neurotypical strategies to manage her behaviour, such as reward charts, naughty step, or time in. Nothing worked, and some of it made the behaviour a lot worse. I think when my daughter got a diagnosis, we paid privately for a diagnosis of fetal alcohol because we knew she'd been prenatally exposed to quite a lot of alcohol. And I think once she got that diagnosis, we read up extensively on fetal alcohol, and we looked at strategies in managing the behaviour, and we started to accommodate her need. We understood that it wasn't bad behaviour, it was brain-based behaviour. We've found though that even within the strategies used for fetal alcohol, a lot of them don't seem to work for our child. And that leads to you feel an awful sense of failure, that you're trying so hard to make a difference and it doesn't work, or when you've got on top of a behaviour, it shifts on to something else. I think something else we've struggled with is that fetal alcohol isn't recognised as a disability, so it doesn't attract any funding. If my daughter had Down syndrome or autism, we would have probably got more support through funding, but people are limited if there's no funding attached to your child. We have had a bit through her intellectual disability, but I don't think the amount of funding we've got correlates with her need. Her need is far greater. She's a high and complex needs child, and we've been left to manage her behaviour, but virtually on our own. I think another compounding factor is at school, she presents very well. Problems are starting to emerge, but she presents well outside of the home, and she saves it up into her safe place, and she gets home and she dysregulates. So there we've been told quite a lot, well, she's good at school, she's good here, so it must be a problem with the parents, and that's not the case at all.
What strategies or interventions have professionals tried?
I talked about some of those earlier. I think that we've been told to do some neurotypical stuff when she was younger. I do believe that professionals who are working with us are starting to understand more that this isn't bad behaviour, it's brain-based behaviour, and there have been some fantastic professionals who do get it, but they're still limited because there's no evidence-based interventions that are being put into place in New Zealand, especially for fetal alcohol. So we have got some amazing professionals on board, and we've had some really wonderful professionals supporting us as well. And this is ongoing as well, and it's really important to have that good collaboration as well between ourselves and the professionals. It's really hard living with a child who's violent because it really knocks your self-esteem and your belief in yourself, and it gets hard because you do have a lot of self-doubt. But despite that, I still think me and my husband, we've done an amazing job with what we've been given.
Okay. What do you think should be some of the solutions to this issue?
The first solution for me would be to have FASD recognised as a disability, so that provides funding, it provides more pathways for young people and their families. There needs to be an upskilling of the workforce in reactive attachment, in fetal alcohol, in child-to-parent violence as well. A lot of child-to-parent violence is not bad behaviour. A lot of these children have got neurodisabilities and are undiagnosed. So it's very easy to blame the parents when actually it's a neurodisability probably. So diagnostic pathways more clearer so the child can get a diagnosis, you know what you're working with. And I think just understanding and supporting that and listening to the family and without judgment, because I feel that we go to these multi-agency meetings and I feel that everyone's got their own view of what should be happening, and it's overwhelming having a lot of professionals there who've all got their own opinions, but they've not lived with this extreme behaviour day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, and it just wears you down. It's just so tiring having to deal with behaviour all the time.
Thank you, Lee. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, make sure I've got all the buttons clicked. So Lee, has found not much has been that helpful. I mean, she's about a year on from where she was when she last talked about this issue, and her daughter is now being looked after in a wraparound fashion with 24/7 sort of supervision and supports, which means that she's had to move out of the family home because it became too unsafe. It's not ideal, but Lee is saying she's beginning to get some true respite recovery. They've got what they call a high and complex needs plan here in New Zealand, where they are actually working as a multi-agency team to provide her daughter with kind of sensory supports, some activities, educational help, and then trying to work with the family as to best how can they keep a positive relationship going whilst Katie is actually not living at home. It doesn't mean she's not going back, but at the moment she is having to be in supported accommodation with people who are slightly FASD minded, I would say. It sounds like they need a lot more training. Lee is pretty good at actually training them. That is often the case, isn't it? As parents, whatever the issue is, we end up training others because professionals themselves have never had any formalized training in terms of the neurodisability and the impacts that has on the children, young people, and the family. So we're going to talk about these different programs. There's a lot of overlap between some of them. Some of these you'll have heard of. The Step Up program, established by, I think it was Rout and Anderson, quite a long time ago, and it's had quite a lot of evaluations. Essentially, it has a mixture of ideas. There are some cognitive behavior and skill-based ideas about how to help people communicate respectfully, but there's also restorative emphasis, trying to restore the relationship between parents and children where it's sort of been, ripped apart, so to speak, by the behavior of the child. It's got a strong focus on using the Duluth power control wheel for a respect wheel. We'll look at that in a second. But it is all about trying to learn and practice skills for respectful relationships. There's 21 sessions. I mean, it's quite a long program, but often that's what people need. Joint and separate sessions. So, some with the family all together, and others, mum and dad separately, child separately. But it's trying to help the parents reestablish leadership where they might have lost it. And for the young people, if there are areas where they're struggling to work out how to interpret when people get angry or when they're getting angry, it's trying to help them increase their skills. That's things, of course, that we often try and teach our children anyway, but it's done in a acknowledgement of there's been violence, there's been abuse, can we try again kind of way. Here is a program. It's not available as far as I know in New Zealand. It might be available in Australia. I don't know if it is, but anyway, the idea is obviously we're moving back to non-abuse, and for helping young people to partly, as Rout and Anderson say, experience the discomfort of their difficult feelings as they recognize the impact of their behavior while helping them feel supported and competent. That's not easy for our young people, because sometimes it would seem with some of our brain domain impairments that the capacity to actually really understand others' feelings, almost empathy, is really, it's hard to find in our children. But having said that, I still keep looking for empathy in mine, and I do see it. I do catch glimpses of it, and when I see it, I try to really praise my sons and actually go, yep, you've really reached out to somebody. So this is the respect wheel that Rout and Anderson developed. It's I've given the reference there, but essentially, obviously, it's trying to turn the sort of abusive aspect, so that could be whatever it is. I mean, physical abuse perhaps, but often it's the put downs and emotional abuse, isn't it? The belittling comments that really exhaust poor mum and dad or caregiver, or grandma or whoever, and the blaming and never taking responsibility. So, whoopsie. Often that is there, and it can be quite overwhelming. And the idea is that by doing this program, that you can move some of these behaviors into non-threatening behavior, expressing one's opinions and feelings and distresses without it turning to custard and ending up violating and harming others. It's about building that respect, trusting the family members, and trusting each other, and communicating that in a way that young people can express their needs, but they're not always going to get what they want. And it's also about respecting the home environment. So it's like, how do you get your young person to not keep smashing holes in the walls, and actually understand how distressing and destructive that can be on other family members. And it's obviously a process over time, and then there's a maturation element, isn't there, often in our young people, where when they're teens, it just seems as if there's no hope whatsoever. However, often they can mature a little bit into their 20s, even with significant brain impairments. So that's one program. There's the non-violent resistance, and I definitely know that I've given you one reference there to some good stuff happening, I think in the UK. It's a handbook reference, but essentially there's stuff going on in both Australia and the UK and Ireland. Declan Coogan's written a lot about non-violent resistance. So this is really a tool or a group focus where for parents, essentially, or for caregivers, those looking after children, because it's not for the young people themselves, it's for parents to actually take control of the situation. 10 to 12 weeks group program, often. one-to-one and group-based activities, but basically to work out what's triggering the situation, trying to de-escalate, trying to challenge harmful behavior, but not in a way, obviously, that leads to more harm. Obviously focused on restoring relationships as well. But there's a whole series of processes, and a lot of the groups are, there's, very, very strong processes of terms that are used. The goal is to resist violence, but not control it. The parent and caregiver has to be in control of themselves, but they're not trying to control the young person. And that's obviously quite a key point there. Somehow, because that's the hardest thing I certainly found in my own experience, that keeping control of my own emotions while the children are escalating and screaming at each other, the boys in particular fighting together in front of me and trying to go like, I'm trying to separate you, I'm trying to calm the situation and not calming it, and sort of ending up swearing yourself and making it a whole bag worse because you've lost control of how you feel. So trying to sort of, in a sense, empower yourself through the support of the other group members as well. You're trying to read the triggers so that you can de-escalate, but you're also trying to establish your parental authority through setting clear limits. So you're taking non-violent actions, but you're being transparent, and you're actually using a support network. So they talk about things like increasing parental presence, asking for support, naming the issue, having a family meeting where you actually say, right, we're declaring that we've got this problem going on in our family, and we're going to basically work towards no violence, and that includes all of us. So kind of sharing that problem, but actually the parent really driving that attempt to resist violence, non-violence resistance. So sometimes the parents, doing things that they would, instead of running away, trying to increase parental presence, or increase finding out where their child is when their child's disappearing all the time, trying to visit places where they know their child might be. So sometimes that can be quite confrontative, but it is aimed at trying to help families break out of repetitive, unhelpful patterns, and it is trying to obviously achieve reconciliation in some capacity between a child. This would obviously be probably an older adolescent perhaps. This is a nice quote that I got from the website Green Moon Training that talks about the need to increase parental presence. I mean, I know there's an element of, well, a child's a teen, they go out and do their own thing a bit more and they're more independent and so on. But at the same time, we've got to, with our children, be giving the message, I am your parent, I'll always be your parent, even when you do behave in a violent and aggressive way, because you're trying to anchor the child and give them a sense of belonging. And when the child has the parent and their morals and values in their mindset, they're encouraged to behave better. Easier said than done, of course, but actually trying to use a process where you're, if you like, reclaiming that you're you are the authority to some extent, but you're not being authoritarian. You're actually just saying, I'm in there for you, even though there's all this stuff going on that's pretty distressing. Another approach that some of the groups have taken is the classic cycle of abuse. Now, that's obviously come out of interpersonal violence. And again, we could think about the pros and cons of whether this is useful when thinking about neurodisability and FASD in particular. It may not be that this cycle is the same for us with our kids. It may not be, but some groups are built up with some of these ideas. You've got this sort of cycle going on, the tension's increasing, mother might be becoming distressed or father, and they might feel the need to placate. I mean, people talk about accommodating the person. I hate the terms don't fit, of course. Abuse is not appropriate really, but there's an incident of some kind, it's blown up, and somebody's been threatened or harmed, usually one of the caregivers, and at the same time, after the incident, there's an attempt perhaps by the young person to say sorry, or actually maybe just blame the parent or caregiver for winding them up, or minimize, it wasn't that bad, was it? You've only lost another 5 cups. Oh, you can find more cups. You do have to have humor at all times, of course. And then the incident is sort of forgotten because we were having a quiet patch again, and we're just getting on with our business. This is called the honeymoon phase in the classic cycle of abuse, and then off we go again. It may not be. I don't know that it's entirely appropriate, but some groups do sort of say there are elements of that might be applicable. And a couple of the courses to mention. There's the Break for Change group in the UK, and it's a 12-week program. It's for parents. One for parents and one for adolescents. Basically, it's two, they run alongside each other. It is solution focused, but it's also thinking about how to break into the cycle patterns of behavior that have become abusive and violent at times. But it's trying to create, belief in the possibility of change. The young person obviously has to, agree to participate, and that can be hard. I had one of mine participate in a kind of refuge one that was focused on positive relationships and what's good, not good, harmful, not harmful, those sort of things in the family environment. But he said to me, well, he did the course because I didn't do one at the same time. It was just one he did, that he knew the stuff, but he the reality was he knew, but it was still our problem and our fault, and he couldn't implement it. Basically he could not implement the material that he knew. So what would have been helpful is to have had a group, I think, where we were both doing similar material alongside each other, and where we came together to go like, how can we implement what you've just learned and what maybe I've just learned. So some of these programs do that effectively, and others perhaps don't do that. But there's opportunity in some of the core components to, reduce the parents' feelings of isolation, as well as actually challenge the young people in terms of what they feel they may or may not be entitled to. Now, that's been identified in research for some young people, that there is a strong sense of entitlement, and that parents have relinquished by sort of giving up too hard basket stuff their control. However, that's not every case, is it? So one has to work out what will work for one's own family, but examining strategies for creating meaningful and practical consequences, well, again, that's kind of interesting for parents to decide if they need to write an explicit set of rules, or to actually just keep it down to a few minimum. What are the consequences for unacceptable behavior? How will that actually be processed? How will the rules be discussed and the consequences be implemented if one has set some boundaries for the young person? Again, that might not apply to some of us with some of the children that we have. However, it may be that it might not work when they're 12, but it might begin to work when they're 16. They might have developed and matured to a point where you can actually have some more robust rules and boundaries that you can be concrete but explicit about, that wouldn't make sense when they were 12, but they've matured enough to maybe start a process when they're 16. But it's important to explore feelings for everyone, anger, as well as how to be more looking after self, caring for self, and so forth. Another one, breaking the cycle, which is using that term, which is there's an article by Wilkes and Wise from, I think it's Anglicare in Australia, Anglicare Victoria, and they did a similar thing. Basically a therapeutic group for parents in particular, and they reported and did assessments and measurements of whether parents felt better after doing the project course or not, and they talked about that parents felt that incidents had reduced, that parents had better insight and gained some skills to try and sort of reestablish their authority or the respect in the home, and that parents were able to interrupt the cycle of violence. So, for some people it will help. And I always say, well, if you haven't got something, why don't you start something and see if you can actually make a difference? I'm a great advocate, as you know, with sort of peer-to-peer support. So some programs may reduce. Now, Eddie Gallagher, a number of you will have heard of this famous Australian who's just worked for, I mean, I think he's retired now, but done some fantastic work over the years. Again, it won't work for everyone. I've heard people sort of say, well, no, it's too much focus on behavioural change, and that their children can't really change because of their neurodisabilities. But others have said, oh no, it's been quite helpful because it's helped parents sort of regain some confidence. So there's a lot of, it's about a 9-session plus homework. Who's in charge? It's focused on the parents to help parents gain support and reassert their parental authority, and try and sort of see positive changes in the relationships with young people. First few sessions explore blame and shame, you know, what's going on in the family, how's it got to this place, what are the things, because just talking about it, it can be painful and can be the first time that most people have actually kind of named the fact that it's going on at home, because it's just such a big shame that people feel, and they find it really hard to feel comfortable to talk about. But it is focused on trying to unpacking some of those things for the parent, help the parent become more assertive. You know, again, as I said, not to be authoritarian, but to actually just stand their ground, and to be clear about, you know, the rules and consequences, and what will happen when the unwanted behavior occurs. Now, it's obviously only small things and small changes can occur at once. It's not big things that families will be encouraged to look for. It's incremental small things, like a child apologizing when they've never apologized before, or reaching out to do something thoughtful for the parents. It's about noticing that and actually obviously rewarding that too, but also being clear about, okay, if the behavior continues, or that, you know, and if the consequence is less time on the tech, then that might have to be the case. But then you have to often make sure that you've got support in implementing that consequence, because obviously that can lead to you being vulnerable if it's just you and you're not backed up by your partner, or perhaps the wider support group that you might want to try and get to help you stick to what your changes might be. But it's also, Gallagher talks a lot about following through. It's no good just saying it, but actually sticking to what you say. Your reasonable expectations, you know, to children who are challenging and aggressive. Try to sort of recapture some authority. It's not easy, of course. Other approaches, I'm putting up lots of information today, but those of you who are watching or who watch later can look at this and explore the web links yourselves. Some great stuff out there. Jo Howard, again in Victoria, she's done a lot of work with Winston Churchill Fellowship, unpacking this particular issue. And there's a program that started to step up, and a new one called Renew, which is looking at working with mothers and children who've experienced family violence. So you can find out more about that. Sorry, somehow gone on a few clicks. Laura Moulds, I mentioned last time, she's got a program that she's developed, a program of about, I think it's about 8 weeks, and it's particularly for justice sessions. Oh no, over 3 months, 18 intervention sessions for those young people who've ended up involved in justice programs because of their violence. Again, hers is quite simple, but it's support and you know, skill development around prioritizing relationships, improving family and other relationships where inappropriate, you know, interchanges are happening, having a culture of no violence rather than you know, reduce violence. So just actually saying, well, look, we don't want to see any harm coming from anyone to anyone. Developing skills in emotional regulation, communication, and problem solving. Again, this is stuff that we do a lot. Obviously, you try to do a lot with our kids in neurodisability fields. So a lot of what people are doing are only doing what we kind of know we try to do, but actually trying to do that in a group format and sustain it over a period of time. Julie Selwyn and colleagues, they've look a lot at the non-violence resistance in their report there, particularly for adoptive and fostering families. Yvonne Newbold has got stacks of webinars now. If you explore the web links, they're absolutely fantastic. And then a new resource, Respect YP, RYP, links there. And that's a group, I think this is being quite widely researched, a group of a young people's program, basically focusing on reducing, aggression and violence and helping build skills, improving relationships. 18 weeks, again, 9 sessions with the young person, 7 sessions with parents, and 2 sessions with the family together. So lots of stuff actually out there once you start looking. So I hope a number of you will be able to explore some of these things that I put up. So we're sort of heading towards the end of this webinar. But I'm just going to, highlight a few further resources, stroke advice. Basically, I don't like some of the terminology, so I don't like victim perpetrator binary. There's a lot of potential to blame. We need to find terminology that'll work for us in terms of communicating about it, but being honest and upfront. We do need more services. We need more specialist provision. And we need to find a team. And sometimes we're looking to professionals to provide that team, and that's not necessarily going to happen. So how do we find a team that it might involve 1 or 2 support workers or professionals, but how do we actually get a group around us and get them collaborating, become like Team X or Team Anita or Team Dima, as the case of my youngest. As I said, Yvonne Newbold talks a lot about changing the environment, lowering the demands to reduce the meltdowns, because we're trying to find out what they're communicating. Most parents instinctively don't want to lose their young people because it's not like interpersonal violence, where often the male might be expected to leave. It rarely happens with young people. They want to find a way to live safely together, rather to continue to endure the daily nightmare that is the constant physical, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse. So we need to find options to make that happen. But at the same time, we do need too many people with violent and challenging behavior end up out of home. They do end up having to leave. And so what's available for them? Often not enough. So we do need to have forms of not just respite, but shared accommodation, group homes, supported, supervised, individual, tailor-made options. We do need those options for a period of time for some of these children, while the kind of more wraparound supports are perhaps organised, because sometimes people have to make big funding applications to get anything. Somebody told me, and sort of mentioned that, that young people obviously need to be meaningfully occupied, and kept busy. We know this. A lot of them, school hasn't worked out or training hasn't worked out. So they are kind of at a loose end, and they've got lots of energy to burn. So how do we occupy them meaningfully when we're worried about this particular issue, when they could blow up because they're kind of get dysregulated so easily? And they need to have ownership of what's going on for them. That's hard too, because like that whole sort of like it's never my fault, as well as where's the things that they can be passionate about, the hobbies and the interests where they can just fully own their future goals, whatever that may be. We do need respite, and we need more respite and more respite. And again, we can't get enough respite. That's the worrying thing. Family needs to be at the center of any intervention work, so not on the edges. It's not just putting the young person at the center, the family, their views. What does everybody want in the family? How can we make it happen? So often, in my own case, it felt like workers were discovering maybe what one of my sons or both of my sons wanted, and never quite what my partner and I wanted, or never what our biological daughter wanted for her family, and so on. The family need to be at the center of the assessments and processes, as well as what the package of support and care might be, or intervention. We know about not waiting for the crisis. Too often we are waiting for the crisis, or the crisis happens. The police are called. So often, most of the help I got, unfortunately, was through the police because they were the people that, you know, got to a point where saying, we're just coming around to this house too often. You know, we need you to be safe, and we need the family harm team, we need refuge, and we need child protection to actually look at the harm to the family. So they pushed a lot of that, which, you know, ideally, because I was trying to prevent things happening, because I knew things had been happening for years and years, we wouldn't have got to that stage as youth justice as last resort. So we do need to see systemic change, obviously, don't we, in both our countries, I think, because we don't want our young people criminalised. We don't want them having criminal records for assault. Luckily, our youth justice system, and my experience has been where my boys have been taken to court, they actually have been discharged quite easily with warnings, or we've had family group conferences that have been quite effective in terms of getting more resources. So we have been able to not criminalise by using justice routes. But, you know, it's not something most parents wish to do or would have perhaps the courage to do. So here's some more resources. You can look through those, pause the slides on replay. Some great resources if you wish to actually read more, study more, get some of your questions that you're thinking about answered. Quite a few Australian ones as well, just to help you out there. Got some good people in Australia doing stuff. There's a centre in the UK in Oxford that's doing some stuff. We've got the PIPA project going on in Sydney. Some really great stuff being reported, and you can look that up. So if you say there's nothing out there, there's actually more than you realise. Here's a few books that I've read. That's obviously the Bonnet one. Amanda Holt, who's done a lot of work out of Oxford, Eddie's book, and then Declan Coogan, his book from Ireland. So these are all good, easy, relatively easy reads actually. And here's a case study. Now, in our last few moments, we'll just because what I want to do is maybe unpack that one when we have our next session. So this is what we can all do together. Gwen and Anthony need help. So for our webinar 3, they've got a couple of kids who've basically, you know, have a myriad of diagnosis and issues going on, and they've had trauma, and basically the lad is high energy, but, you know, very aggressive, and quite often that can, you know, be the verbal as well as physical damage, and sometimes punching and smacking, and that can be overwhelming for the sister. Mum's always trying to sort things out, and it gets exhausted. So we've got Gwen and Anthony. They need some help, and the questions we if we don't have lots of other questions, we'll definitely try and sort of unpack you know, what's going on for them. How, you know, should they be concerned? Is there any help out there? Thinking about your own situation, your own locality, is there any help? Who can you turn to? Who should they turn to? Will help be provided? Will it be any good? And if it was you and your family, what would you advise? So thank you for being here for this webinar, and obviously to those of you who might listen to it on another occasion. There'll be lots for you to chew over and think about. Please do turn up to the next session, because it would be a great opportunity to talk things through. So ka kite, I'm just going to pass over to Sophie to round things off for today.
Can I just check you can all see my screen again?
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you, Anita, for some amazing insights there. The courage and vulnerability shown by Lee in sharing her story, and it's sad to say, but I suspect there's many of you out there who can relate to her story. The information and resources that Anita has provided, there's so much to take in today and just so valuable. So thank you so much, Anita, for sharing with us. As Anita mentioned, everybody who's registered for today's session, you will receive a recording within about 24 hours from now of today's session. I'm also going to send out session 1 too, because I've heard from a few people that they didn't actually sign up for the first session, so we'll make sure that you get that information too. And when you receive the email from me, if you have any questions that you didn't get round to asking today and that have, you know, provoked any thoughts, please do feel free to share those with us, and you can send those back to me on the email address that I'll be contacting you on. And as a final departure, as we leave, I just want to remind everyone that you can call the NOFASD helpline. There are also other lines that aren't FASD specific, but you have Beyond Blue, Lifeline and Samaritans, to name a few, who are there to offer support as needed. So thank you, everybody. Please do visit us on the website at nofasd.org.au if we can be of any assistance. And we look forward to seeing you in session 3 on the 4th of August. Thanks very much. Thanks, Anita, and thanks, Kurt. Bye-bye.